Hi, welcome back to the channel. I am Aon Alta, cosmic drifter and intrepid explorer and guide through the world of Jack the Spacedog. In the last episode, we left me and Jack still stranded on the planet of a lost civilization. I was a space courier for important items that people needed to get there and know that it got there. I was being chased by the sect. Long story short, I used a drive that Victus and I, my friend, invented and built. I warped into the atmosphere of a planet, ripped my ship apart, and now here we are. I'm stranded. I covered a lot in the last episode about how the change that I went through to sort of incorporate and be able to use the technology on the planet of this lost civilization, this long gone civilization. And now, Jack and I are now given access and abilities to a technology that is almost inconceivable. With this gift comes a huge burden of having to carry on the wishes of this civilization to rectify a long ago mistake of theirs that led to the creation of the sect, the big all-consuming evil that exists in my world. This next episode, we're going to get into what I do next. What do you do once you're given the weight and the hope and the sorrow of an entire galactic civilization and you're now the only spark left of their hope and their attempt to rectify the greatest mistake of their existence? You might ask, couldn't I have at least reached out to home? So the other aspect of this, the thing that helps to keep my power under control while I'm training, if you'll remember, there's Ted, the terminally irritable machine, my little AI third part of our triad. So Tim is both my guide, my instructor, and sort of an antagonist in a lot of ways. He's gruff but kind. He's snarky, but also can be very serious. The gravity's not lost on him, but it's also not lost on him that I'm just a person. But one of the things that he has done is he's limited what I'm allowed to do because he needs me, in his opinion, he needs me to not have distractions. And I'm already yearning to go home. Having contact with them, I'm sure he knows I would spend all my time focused on that and I need to be focused on this training. Otherwise, I'll never get home. And having contact with them is sort of like a slow torture. Even if they would know that I'm okay, they probably already think that I'm gone. So better to do it all at once. Plus, I'm going to be speaking to them into their mind. None of their devices mean anything to this technology. I would just speak into their mind. Is that helpful? Probably not. Probably for grieving loved ones, that's probably a recipe for insanity. Or at least they would think that they're insane. So it's complicated, but there's not really an option. Not a good option. Tim is a reflection of a mentor of mine that's no longer alive. He was picked because he's both someone I can understand and relate to and that I also looked up to, but was also a tough but fair person. He both is the Tim that I knew and he's not. He's a flavor. He's Tim flavored is probably the best way to describe him. I've argued with him back and forth about this, about I can make it work if I just say the right things, if I just call home, I can make it work. And his answer is, no, stop bargaining, do the work. Do the work, practice, 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 everything else will come. That's always his very frustrating answer. Practice, 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 the rest will come. So eventually I give up. I find ways to make it fun. I don't really understand their palate and their food. For instance, it nourishes me, but it waffles between bland and disgusting. So one of my first tricks that's a non-combat skill is I learned to make a pizza. Because when you can manifest matter, you can manifest it in any way. And I really like pizza. So it's very easy to imagine and internalize having a piece of pizza where the cheese is lava and the sauce is so hot it burns the taste buds off when you bite it. So I start doing things like that, which also irritate him more, but is also a surprisingly skilled use of it. So we kind of meet in the middle. I find ways to do what I want with it, as long as I also do and practice and work on the things that are very difficult and sometimes painful to work on with him. The way in which you have to bend your mind is almost like having the brain version of your arm being twisted up behind your back and the socket almost ripped out. That's sort of the feeling in the mind of the way I have to stretch my concept of understanding. It's not a good way to explain it, but it's as close as I can get. We sort of settle into a rhythm daily, and eventually he has to start ending the sessions because I want to keep going. Once I get on the path and I know where the target is, I don't want to stop. I'm much more durable now, but I will spend days at a time running through his exercises, days on end, no rest. While my body doesn't mind, I still have a human mind. My mind definitely rebels against that. Enduring prolonged stress and exertions, he will have to sometimes shut my power source off, sometimes in comical ways, sometimes in frustrating ways. Often, I'm sure, every time I feel like I'm about to make a breakthrough, which is probably not true. Tim ends up being a very important figure, and eventually he won't be holding the strings. Eventually, in theory, I should move past a point where he has any input or anything constructive to add. If I can sort of start to understand my creative ability within this medium, which is how I start to think about it. I start to pick up things that I haven't done since I got lost. I start to paint. Jack and I play ball. I find nice places to sit and have coffee in the morning. I figure out how to make coffee. I start to do things and make the place home, because making that place home and acting as if this is the new normal rather than thinking about all I don't have is the only way I can keep my sanity and get through that prolonged ordeal in a productive way. So I had to change my perspective of where I want to be and just think about making myself as happy as I can be with where I am. So I'm asked a lot, where the staff came from, and I've never painted it, but since I would traverse these planets for years on end, I got in the habit of always having some kind of walking stick, usually something I'd pick up there. And usually my rule was I didn't take things off planet that weren't to be sold, so I didn't keep any evidence, because in cultures as advanced as this, tracing something back to the biology of a particular planet could be pretty easy. I was on a planet that had a particularly tough type of tree equivalent. I had a branch, a piece of the plant, and I had shaped it over a long time, once I figured out how it could be shaped, into a semblance of a walking stick from a tree on my planet. And it just looked like a stick, and I broke my own rule, and when I left that planet, I took it with me. It just looked like a stick. But it's the only thing I had that I could say, I used it on these planets both for support. Sometimes I'd use it to carry things over my shoulder. Sometimes it would be for self-defense. Sometimes it was for hunting on those planets, because I took very little with me. I had a very tiny, very inconspicuous ship. I learned that you could actually, something as simple as that, given all the technology that I had all the time, was probably one of the most useful tools I ever had. And I found this one that I just got really attached to, and I kept it with me. Because the interface of this technology is a sort of, at least from the outside, a martial arts based interface, everybody always had a focus object. For some, it would be a bow. For some, it would be a blade. For some, it would be a staff, a spear. Things that this race hasn't used in millennia, but remember from their history. And it's like a grounding object, right? A grounding object for their history and a grounding object for them that's juxtaposed against the unbelievable technology. It represents the distance between where they started and where they've come. I just had it because it was my walking stick, and I've learned to use it as a defensive weapon on occasion, but not with any real training. But when I walk into this, I have it's me, and it's Jack. And so this by default becomes my focus object. I have a lot of emotions wrapped up in it. I have a lot of attachment to it. But it didn't look like that. It looked like a stick. What it is now is the transformation it also went through when I went through the process. It's a visual reference for the center of my abilities. It's not where the abilities are, but for me, in my mind, the top portion of it, I have a representation of my little pocket sun, my little blue giant sun sitting in there. It's not the actual sun, but for me, because I'm a visual person, all these things that I had on me transformed to be an important aspect of facets of this power. So Tim, when he's not out as his little 3-ring setup, actually looks like the set of mala beads that I had been wearing when I went in. It just looks like a gray set with little blue glowing parts on it that stays wrapped around my wrist when he's dormant. Or later on in the story when he's trying to be inconspicuous and not stick out when I'm just trying to not be the hero of a lost civilization. I'm just trying to go through a market. So there's a lot of things that I carry around in the paintings that all were objects that I walked in with that change and gain a significance, but mostly it's the way that I end up conceptualizing these abilities that helps me to split it, facets of it, into objects, into individual objects. Anything that's mine, because it's just a representation of the powers, it's not like you can pick up my staff and then all of a sudden be powerful. You can pick it up, but I can make it disappear and reappear back here. It is and it isn't anything. It is something when I hold it, because it's just an outward reflection of something that's really just in me. Same with the mala beads. Tim is really just in me. That he's got an outward expression is because of my limited ability to internalize this insane technology. A lot of that is my stopgap or band-aid to keep myself sane and still be able to think about how this technology works, but in a way that makes sense to me. How I appear and how I've gone about making this work for me is not at all how this program was intended to work. Absolutely, even me being the one was not what they envisioned when they came up with it. But the last standing Atlian who left a message for me that I hear when I go through, he did imagine there would be someone that would come along, or he hoped. He pinned all of his hopes on the idea that if he finished the program, he left it up and running, that someone would come along. But he knew there was no way it would be exactly what they thought they needed. And he also thought that there might have been a chance that the idea that his civilization always thought they had the answers and always knew the next thing to do and always fine-tune everything down to the atom, he thought that might have been the root of their inability to overcome the sect. He thought that even though they felt like they thought in all spectrums and in all directions, they had no one else to mirror that against to find out if that was true. They were it. So how can they know what they don't know? So he also wondered, as he sat there alone on the planet, trying to work out how best to leave this so that somebody might find it, or if they find it, that it might be helpful. He often contemplated and mused on what is out there and what other types of thinking are there out there that he can't conceive simply by virtue of his own biology. So he hoped that maybe not getting exactly what they wanted might also be the answer. Eventually, I'm just living my life on this planet. It's not as though I've forgotten about going home, but it's like a whispered message in the back of my mind that's easy not to hear if I'm not specifically listening for it. One day rolls to the next, and I stop counting them. And it gets easier. And it gets easier. And I actually start to get what I think is pretty good, though Tim would assure me it's not. But I think he says that, and I feel like he smiles, though he does not smile. But I feel like he smiles. I come to the plateau where I train every day, and what was a multi-leveled platform with trees and gardens and a peaceful spot is a blank flat disc. There's nothing there except for a pedestal with a coin sitting in the middle of it. Well, it's more like a ring. Flat ring sitting in the middle of the pedestal. And I yell for Tim. He pops out as his hologram avatar, and I ask him if this is a new, is this some new test? And he says, no test. I said, okay, so what are we doing? He's like, well, that's up to you. It's like, you can continue, or I think you can go home if you want. He said, if you want to go home, pick up the coin and let's go. He said, or if you think you should train some more, turn the coin over, set it back down, and we'll continue. And so Aon thinks about it. He's torn. On the one hand, he's made so much progress. This is a place made for this sort of training. This is the place where this was all supposed to happen for someone. But now that he has the opportunity, the small voice in the back of his head that reminds him that he wants to go home becomes a torrent. Almost a painful burning everywhere. So he's torn. He's of two minds, because between the transformation and all this time training and immersing himself in his history and trying to understand what went wrong and what there is that could be done different, he's almost become two people. He's both Aon himself, and then he's also Aon, savior of existence, sorta. But to have an entire civilization's memories accessible and really there all the time if he wants it, it splits and he becomes this sort of repository of everything and almost dispassionate viewpoint, and able to look from probably the zoomed as far out as you can on the whole situation, becomes an emotionless sort of view on it. And that mind's like, you should train. The best thing for everyone in the long run is that you should stay until you are completely finished. And the other side of him is the frightened young man who just wants to go home. So he can't reconcile it to a single choice. So he says, why don't we let fate decide? And Tim scoffs and yet again reminds him there's no such thing as fate, to which Aon likes to quote to him the exact integer probability of Aon and Victus making the drive that they made, using it at the time they did, and then their address being so wrong that it pops into a pocket dimension that no one's supposed to even know exists, and end up on that planet amongst the many planets in that solar system, and then manage to drop next to the city so that he even knows it's there. Sounds like fate. Whether he says it's probability, I argue it's fate, really doesn't matter. I flip a coin while he's busy explaining to me why fate doesn't exist. And the coin spins on the dais and lands. And we're going to leave it there. I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for joining me. Come back for more Aon and Jack adventures in Jack the Spacedog, through the galaxy, through dimensions, adventure calls, and I must go.